I'm really delighted to be here. It's always great to connect with my old stomping ground and my old community. What I thought we'd do today is follow an agenda pretty much along the following lines. I will kind of set the scene in terms of my perspectives on what's happening in HRO. And I'm not going to talk for long, 3 to 4 minutes. I'll then introduce my panel to give you a little bit of background on themselves and their experience. And then I'll kick off with about 6 or 7 specific questions to engender some debate and discussion. And then we'll open it up to the room. And I'd encourage you to think of questions which you can ask the panel, which we'll attempt to answer. The whole idea of today is to really create a debate and hopefully share with you some wisdom from the panelists in terms of their experience, which you can take away back to your organizations. So, HR outsourcing. What is happening to HR outsourcing? If we go back, and we're actually quite fortunate that one of the panelists goes back to what I call HRO 1.0. If we go back to those original days of HR outsourcing, very big comprehensive HR outsourcing deals were done, covering all aspects from payroll through to recruitment, through to benefits administration, often deals approaching $1 billion in size. And this was the heyday of the HR outsourcing industry some 10 years ago, 10, 12 years ago. We very quickly moved on to what has been called HRO 2.0, where the deals started taking on much more of a transformational aspect to them. So embedded in those transformational deals were this concept of replacing the HRIS platform, or in many clients' cases, implementing an HRIS platform for the first time. And we started seeing storms on the horizon at this phase of the history of HRO. Many of these deals caused huge amounts of losses for vendors. Many of the clients who attempted these deals never ever got implementations rolled out on a global basis. And you could argue that these deals were actually a systems integration project dressed up or hidden inside an HR outsourcing deal. So we started seeing failure and challenges in the industry emerge. After that, we saw the era of HR, which was called HR 3.0. And the big phenomenon about 3.0 was really the move to a much more of a one-to-many model. So 1.0 and 2.0 were very much one-to-one models in terms of often lift and shift, siloed operations with the client. The one-to-many model implied very often that a multi-tenant, SaaS-based solution was being used. But throughout the history over the last 10 years, the one common phenomenon we've seen is that these deal sizes have declined and these relationships have declined in size dramatically. So go back to the $800 million, billion-dollar deals in HR 1.0, fast forward to the last 2-3 years, and a $150 million deal is a big deal in HR outsourcing today. So where does this go? Is there going to be an HR 4.0? Or is HR outsourcing as we know it finally going to be put to bed? What is SaaS doing to this whole industry and where it goes? I have coined a phrase which says the fundamental impact of SaaS in our industry is that SaaS is melting business processes. And you might say, well, SaaS is just a techie phenomena. I think when we look back on this industry, January 2012 is going to be a very important stake in the ground. And you may ask, why January 2012? Well, in that sort of 6-month window across January 2012, 3 things happened. Workday really burst on the scene in terms of growth. SAP bought SuccessFactors, and Oracle bought Taleo. Now, anyone have an idea on how much Workday is worth today? So today's stock price is $74. The company's worth $12.85 billion. Now, there may be many of you who've got companies worth more than that in the room, but I guarantee no one in this room unless there's someone from Salesforce.com, has got a revenue to price multiple of 36 times revenue. And just for the record, for the accountants in the room, Workday does not make a profit today. So, phenomenal change in the industry, phenomenal impact on where HR outsourcing is going, and hopefully we're going to explore some of those concepts in the next hour. So with that, I'd like to introduce my team. Richard.
Thanks very much, Mike. My name is Richard King, and I work for Procter & Gamble, so a consumer goods company. I'm responsible for HR operations for Europe and for benefits administration globally. I guess as Mike intimated, P&G were one of the probably first companies doing the big sort of HR 1.0. So we actually went lock, stock and barrel with IBM pretty much almost to the day 10 years ago. And our relationship started 1st of Jan 2004. And here we are 10 years on, and we're now in more of a best of breed model. So a lot of what Mike just described there, we've sort of lived through quite a bit of it. So delighted to be here and looking forward to a good discussion.
Hugh?
Good afternoon, my name's Hugh Williams. I work for Capita. At the moment I'm one of the operations directors within the recruitment partnering project, which is the outsourced by the MOD of Army recruitment. There's a number of key aspects to it that we're running at the moment, but I think one of the issues that I might bring is a sort of understanding of the partnering arrangement, which, although very popular, certainly with a client, initially the difficulties, complexities, and what different stakeholders bring to that is brought to bear within Army recruitment on numerous different levels, from the politics, from the very highest levels, external and internal, to the spread of the operation that we have to control, from recruiting sort of surgeons through to recruiting people with a reading age of just 11. So huge change that we're sort of implementing in that area, and real passion from the clients and a sort of wariness in outsourcing. So that's an element I hope to bring this afternoon.
Okay. David?
Good afternoon, my name's David Mason and I'm the Global Chief Operating Officer for Resourcing in the Royal Bank of Scotland. It's possibly the longest business title I've ever held, and I've held a few of those. My role is looking after all of the talent acquisition and deployment across RBS. To put that into quantity, we would do in the region around about 20,000 transactions a year. About half that external recruitment, and even that point we don't get on to the contingent labour. I've been working in the talent acquisition field for the last 15 years, so worked in engineering, IT and financial services, and have seen both sides of the coin in outsourcing recruitment as well as building in-house functions. So hopefully it gives me a perspective of what works and doesn't work on both sides of the fence.
Great. So let me start it off by asking a few questions based on the themes I've alluded to. We talked about the change in HR outsourcing. This phenomena was seen in the IT outsourcing world over the last 5 or 6 years, where big mega IT outsourcing deals went down a multi-sourcing route into best-of-breed sourcing. So, perhaps, Richard, I could ask you, is a comprehensive HR outsourcing officially dead?
I don't know if it's officially dead, but if I think about a kind of one-stop shop, one supplier providing all processes across the board, certainly at least for us, it's dead. That's a place we started at in 2004, as I mentioned earlier. And really what we found after 3 or 4 years was that the whole premise that one supplier would get enough critical mass in this big growing HR outsourcing market and therefore be able to be strong everywhere and provide the advantage of integrating across the board just didn't play out. So for our particular partner, international relocation wasn't a core strength. And we reached a point together where we both said, from our supplier, said, look, we don't really want this business anymore because it's not strategic to us. And we said, well, to be frank, we don't really want you to deliver it for us because, clearly you don't have the capability required. So we've sort of moved to a place that's a kind of mix of best of breed. So where we think there's real niche players with unique capability, we've moved to them, whilst at the same time trying to keep in strong consideration the fact that we don't want to end up with a selection of silos which creates its own problems. So I would say our core vendor is providing a sort of integration layer across the board. So if it comes to kind of human capital management, employee data, organization data, all this sort of stuff, then we see that as being critical as having one player. That creates the glue. And then you've got all the various particular service areas where we really are looking more at a best of breed. So certainly is the monolithic thing dead? From everything I've seen with people I've spoken to, I would certainly say yes. Is it dead that you then end up chopping it into little bits? I would say that's probably throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
So there's this dreaded, what I call the T word amongst vendors in the outsourcing space, transformational. And a lot of vendors, depending on who they are, often the A vendors tend to use this word a lot more, transformational outsourcing. Transformational outsourcing. And we've all been sold transformational outsourcing in the past. David, what's your thought on this? Does transformational outsourcing in today's world exist? Or should we just forget it and focus on transactional procurement?
I think there's a couple of dangers there. First of all, focusing on purely the transactional piece leads you into a place that is arbitrage on price only and how cheap you can produce that process. And there are lots of competitions in the market, and particularly even in-house, where we can move our work offshore to do that. The transformational piece is also a difficult one because it can be very emotive inside any organisation. If we look at recruitment processes or talent management inside of an organisation, people have lots of aspirations. The delivery of that is very, very difficult. So I think in the end, it really comes down to focusing on what the client's problem is and solving that. The transformation piece comes next during the length of that contract because that's quite important. Too often in my career, I've perhaps had to deliver bad news to vendors, which is they've got to the end of the contract and the contract's been awarded to somebody else, and they turn around and ask the obvious question, why? Well, it didn't move on, you didn't transform what you were doing, you didn't move with us as an organisation because you were delivering a contract we asked for 3 years ago. So I think it's a difficult sell coming into an organisation, but I think it is something that's absolutely necessary when you're living through the life of a contract, particularly if you're going to secure that and make sure you're not in a rebid situation at the end of it.
We found similar challenges, David, actually, that often we found vendors that deliver the service that you contract with on day one and don't evolve it, which is sort of insane, really. It's sort of, well, why would you stand still for 5 years? And a couple of things we've done that have tried to address that is, one, actually in the contract to put some sort of constructs to incentivize some sort of transformation, so a share, because often if you transform, it's talking about taking cost out, and if you're taking cost out, the value may fall, in one's camp as the client or in the other camp, and having some sort of gain sharing in there. And then the other bit is around trying to establish some sort of innovation process together with a view of innovating in a way that's scalable across other clients. And have you had similar experiences in RBS?
It is. It's tremendously difficult. Some of our suppliers are in the room today, so it's a difficult question because that innovation word goes into the contract, and it's probably a dreaded word for everybody around here, particularly on the supplier side. What does that mean to the client? Often, again, most of these deals are originally sold on a price. You're coming in, we'll take over a process, we'll take out and delayer some of that, and we'll sell it back to you at a cheaper price. The point, though, comes on about how you transform onto the qualitative aspects of it, particularly on the HR side. People have woken up to the fact now that we are competing not necessarily on a product or an IT system, it's our people. It's the frontline people who are dealing with customers. And I think that is probably the next iteration about how do you capture that, how do you sell that back? Because that's a difficult concept. It's very easy to take a process and say, look, we'll sell it back to you and it'll be cheaper, but how do you improve something to get a better outcome? And that's where a lot of our thinking's at this stage.
I think there's a huge desire for transformation in lots of things. It's a very easy statement to make that you want to transform, the implication being it will be an improvement. But the ability to record and score and measure as you advance means that you tend to fall into other avenues, and there's sometimes then a nervousness on both sides of that transformational piece. Huge change to achieve transformation. It has a different view from supplier to customer, and one might see it as a revenue, the other sees it as transformation. So I think your point about gain share is absolutely critical, so that the output required is the same on both sides, and a genuine desire to achieve it, but both. And there is, of course, a healthy tension in that, but it is something that sort of must be recognised, I think.
So, Hugh, why don't we stay with you? If you think of these outsourcing relationships, and often we used to say in the industry, if you can crack government, you can do anything. So, what do you think is the most important thing for outsourcing success from a client perspective?
I think there's, again, they go through stages. It's very easy to say simple steps, commercial best practice, achievement of our business aims. I think with central government or ministries or any of those, they're nervous of commercial organisations. There's so much out there that commercial organisation is simply ripping them off, that they lose faith in their own ability to make sensible decisions, and they try and restrain that. They try and build in a process that holds real commercial risk taken in check. If for a civil servant, certainly on sort of Ministry of Defence, there's no real reason for them to take huge risk. There's no reward for that risk. It's a very slow-moving process. So a commercial partner coming in, pushing, changing, transforming, making risk goes against their culture. So bringing them with you, I think you need, the best thing you can hope to achieve is a development, a real belief and a sort of faith that you are acting in their best interests. I say they're very reluctant to stand back and accept that you're there to deliver that change and let you run with it. They've got to feel bought into it. Very easy to say, and all clients would say that, but I say there's a different approach to risk-taking where you have a structured organisation with a very slow-moving progression change, and actually static, steady delivery, a little bit better than it was last year, is actually seen as good. And the huge risk-taking, let's take a bit of a risk, let's really make things different, is a little bit shocking. And that's sort of my sort of experience in that area.
I'd just like to build on that. I think from a client side, there just needs to be better understanding and education around pricing and services. Often clients will not understand how your businesses are constructed or the pricing points or how you arrive at it. And consequently that links to a misunderstanding about the services. And I think that's an important point about, does your customer and client really understand the business? Do they understand what they are buying? Too often, I've sat at the bar with colleagues and we're bemoaning various things across the industry and everything else. What you find is that it may be a supplier or somebody else, but they've been driven down so much on their cost, and because you understand it, that they're never able to drive or deliver that service effectively because they're having to reflect that. And I think that there has to be an education about, this is what it costs to produce, this is what we're trying to make a profit. And if you just look at the basic profit of most of the organisations in here, you say, that's reasonable, yeah? Nobody's trying to rip in anything else, but it's about understanding some of those commercial aspects and what we do collectively to make sure it's an education, whether it's an HR department or a procurement department, that's understanding those pricing points.
So perhaps, Richard, picking up on that, when these outsourcing transactions happen, you started out with HR 1.0, you probably shed a lot of talent and skill inside your organisation. Now we're moving to this very different, multi-sourced, best-of-breed type world. So what are the key skills an organization needs to maintain and nurture to really make this world work? Because it's different from 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I have to say we kind of learnt our way into that probably the hard way. So in our 1.0 world, the assumption was that our provider would just deliver everything, and we would have some sort of commercial relationship, scorecards, and a bit of light governance, and everything would roll on because they had all the assets. As you said, in the 2.0 or 3.0 world, it looks very different. So what we've found is that from an operational governance standpoint, we've found that we need to have a good understanding of really what's going on within our providers, much deeper than we might have first thought. So if you like, a lot of the sort of high-level leadership skills around the process knowledge, what's the business outcome we're trying to achieve in the first place, right the way down to the IT infrastructure, tends to be pretty important. Because often what the vendor needs is actually direction. So what we've found is the direction we want to go with our services needs to come from us. We had assumed at the outset, because all of our people that used to set direction, used to innovate, and so on and so forth, would move to our providers, that they would provide that back to us. But the reality is, unless you're an integral part of the client company, that's just impossible. So that whole area of, if you like, understanding the direction, leadership, and penetration of the core model is critical. The other bit that we've found that's essential is, I guess you'd call it sort of operations management, because when you stand back and look at the end-to-end process, you find that, I don't know, pick a percentage, 5-10% of the work to deliver the business outcome is still done in-house by our people. So whether it be payroll, where our people need to provide time and attendance data, et cetera, whether it be employee benefits, where it's enrollments and blah, blah, blah. If the operational discipline isn't there, and if you don't have that close integration, really at a day-to-day working relationship standpoint, it isn't going to happen. So having operational governance of our line business unit operations is a critical thing, and that needs to be done on a global basis, not just sort of point by point in countries. And then the last one, I think we've had to learn how to be good partners. So it will sound a bit cheesy, and Mike, you spoke to it a little bit before, which is about understanding the true total cost of ownership, the true end-to-end activity system to deliver the outcome, and having a genuine, clear point of view on what would it really cost to operate that, what would be fair profit, what would the end-to-end process look like if we decide to do this change. Is it going to make our vendors' lives a nightmare? If it is, that's probably a stupid thing to do. Can we do something different? All of that sort of really feeling ownership for the end-to-end we found is critical. And of course, coming with that then is a genuine partnership, which then has give and take and all those other facets. And if I look at the organization, the way we're structured in Procter & Gamble is we've got a business services organization that sort of takes care of everything that isn't R&D, sales, marketing, and distribution. So whether that be financial processes, HR processes, and so forth. And what we found with people in that organization, I guess myself included, was we were used to running an in-sourced model. Once you outsource it, that whole partnering and that commercial interface that you spoke about, Hugh, is like if there's not something in it for your partner, they'll be very polite, they will give all the right noises about, oh, yes, that's a good idea, yeah, we can go there. But if you don't have an awareness of whether there's something in it for them, then you're going to be pushing something that's going to be a losing proposition. So again, it sounds a little bit cheesy about win-wins and all that sort of stuff, but genuinely what we've found is we've had to work pretty hard at that, and the more we've worked at it and focused on it, actually the better outcomes we've got. So quite multifaceted, I would say.
Yeah. Having been one on the other side of the fence, I'm all too familiar with those squealing noises from vendors. Let's shift gear a bit. I want to go, I saw a lot of RPO companies and recruitment companies as I walked around today, and we've seen a huge amount of hype in the talent management space in terms of the market, software. We've seen a reasonable amount of hype in the RPO space. Witness Alexander Mann recently sold into its third private equity owner. Yet, I saw some data about 3-4 months ago where CEOs are saying talent management is still not solved. Talent management still doesn't work in my company. So, David, what's your view on this? Does RPO enable talent management? Does it hinder talent management? Where is this talent management going with this? All this hype, but CEOs aren't happy.
Yeah, and I think the first part of that question has to be, if we reflect ourselves as HR professionals, what advice and how are we setting this up? And that's about making a much better direct correlation between what the CEOs are asking for from a commercial perspective. If you walk in and say, I'm doing this because of best practice or because so-and-so organised it, that's not a great argument. If you're walking into that room and saying, I can help improve the productivity, your customer relationships, or your profitability, then that's a conversation they're going to entertain for the CFO. So part of that sits with us as HR professionals about fixing that conversation and our role in the organisation. We then need to be very, very clear with our providers and suppliers about what we're asking them to do. And that comes back into a two-way relationship. So, no, I don't believe it hinders, but I think for everything we've just spoken about over the last 10 minutes about having that right relationship, defining out very clearly and very clear what we're asking people to do. Two areas. One, there is certainly you've got to get the operational execution right. So in terms of cost efficiency, that has to work for the organisation. You have to execute well if you're going to put in a talent management strategy. So you've got to recruit or you've got to manage your contingent labour well, but you've got to do the internal piece well, correctly as well. Once you've got that right, you can move on to the strategy. And I think that's that piece where a lot of the RPOs are starting to move into. It's a much bigger leap than getting into that space around strategy and how you're driving that, because that's quite personal to an organisation. It'll be different to Procter & Gamble about how they approach it to the way that we are going to approach it in the Royal Bank of Scotland. And that changes from organisation to organisation.
I know P&G's got some interesting approaches in this area.
Yeah, I mean, P&G is probably one of few companies in the world, maybe a show of hands, does anyone work for a company that's 100% promote from within? Show of hands? So yeah, so it is just P&G in the room. There's very few companies of that ilk left. So for me, I've been with the company 21 years, and that's extremely common. So the way we're looking at talent management is less on the acquisition side. You can imagine we have 2 points of entry. There's a graduate entry, and then there's your more sort of admin entry, and there's sort of, it's almost like we were talking earlier about the sort of NCOs and the officer type of approach. The bit that's maybe relevant to share is then what is it that we do, because our retention rates are about 94-95%, and of the 5 to 6% that leaves, probably 70 to 80% of that is attrition that we've welcomed. The things that we've done that have worked well for us is, by nature of how our company works, we have to develop people for the long term. So if we don't develop people to be the next leader of this, that, or the other, we're stuck. So it means managers don't have an easy get out of jail free card where they go, look at the talent in my organization, it's no good, I need to get an external hire. If you're saying the talent in my team is no good, it means, well, why are you failing in developing your people? So what that does is create a dynamic where managers are always looking for opportunities to stretch and grow and develop their people. We invest a lot in training, a lot in broadening assignments, and we by and large avoided fiefdoms. I don't know how it is in many companies, but certainly what I've seen is you'll get a VP or a director says, right, this is my talent pool, and you're certainly never going to have any of my good people in your talent pool. This doesn't really exist in P&G. So, I mean, we're whatever we are, $85 billion a year company operating in 75 countries. We need people who can lead such a company, and therefore the expectation is that people are moving their talent around. So from an employee value proposition, this tends to work extremely well because people want to build a career, and what we try and do is give them the opportunity to grow a career in P&G. Now, we're quite a big company and quite diverse, so we do pet food with IAMS, we do laundry products like Ariel, but we also do fine fragrances like Dolce & Gabbana and Gucci and Lacoste and so on. So in terms of offering people a very diverse career, we do have that critical mass to do that. But certainly that element of really, really instilling a culture to grow people, for us, is kind of the secret of why it's worked for us.
So I guess a couple RPO providers in the room just made a note to delete PNG from the prospect list. Let's turn to SaaS, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor. We've all seen the rise of SaaS. SaaS started in the front office. Salesforce.com cloudified the front office. You might say, well, why is SaaS so relevant in HR? Well, HR is the first back office function to really adopt SaaS in a big way. You might also say, well, that's just for SMEs and mid-market companies. Well, it's not. I can name about 8 300,000 plus employee companies who are right now rolling out 1 or 2 of the major SaaS solutions. And I'm not talking just talent management, I'm talking core HR. So either Employee Central or Workday being rolled out in these size organizations. We all know in HR that we were the least standardized as a back office in terms of processes in our organization. We all know SaaS, the big benefit of SaaS is not about the technology, it's about the standardization around best practice process models, which SaaS forces on us as an HR organization. So I'm keen to hear from each of the panelists your view on what is SaaS going to do to this HR world and HR outsourcing and HR services, and then we'll open up to the floor for questions.
It's a great question and deserves a very long answer, but I'll try and make sure it's not. I think the first focus is really thinking about employees and managers in the organisation and making life easy for them. It's hugely important. What has happened over the last 5 to 10 years is that lots of processes have been heaped on managers and employees, and that's become a distractor, particularly for consumer or customer-facing organisations. So I think the first point is about how can we make this easier for the line managers and the employees of the organisation. I think that technology is going to be a big player on it. It's almost, if you can imagine that the world of IT and delivery in corporates has almost stood still, while in the consumer land it's rocketed forward. And if you think about Amazon, you think about supermarkets, how easy it's go on to get things online and delivered now. That hasn't been replicated inside of large corporates, and and our employees are starting to notice that. Very cumbersome. I think the second point is really around about cost. It's quite interesting, because at the moment, as we're coming out of this recession, and some of the economies are growing better than others, that change management, that cost agenda is still full on in large corporates. It's a tough environment. I think everybody could describe that here now in their own businesses. And obviously, as market share is perhaps not growing at perhaps the rate we would like it to, taking that, we're having to take cost out. So where are we going to do that? Not in the front line, not in revenue generating roles. So how do we crack that? And I think that's going to change as we go forward. And I think these are disruptive technologies that are going to come into it. I think the third point I probably want to talk about is really this area perhaps around big data. HR departments at the moment have huge amounts of data. We're not using it very, very well. We're not analytical. And there are hugely disruptive technologies that are going out there that are coming in. But I would say that the capability of HR departments to understand it and use it is very, very limited. So if you're selling it or you're using it, how are you going to get across that?
I think it's interesting you finish on that point, because I think what this technology delivers is actually more than some people understand, and particularly the clients starting to truly understand what it can deliver, much more than just a sort of practical solution to a problem where it thought it could save money. There's more in it than that, but who's explaining that to them? Who's informing people outside the sort of HR community of what extra you can get from this? And if that's not explained correctly, there's a confusion of what it's delivering. It's an uncomfortableness with costs built around it. And actually, we're missing a real opportunity, I think, to improve the operation. And there's a genuine sort of insight and intelligence that can come from some of these systems that aren't understood at a sort of operational level. And I think if it's contained within HR as providing just a service, we're really missing the sort of wider benefits for the operation. And with that benefit, comes the increase and rolling it out wider.
Yeah, I mean, certainly if I look in PNG, there's a couple of really big opportunities. So the first one, a little bit to the point you were making, David, that the existing kind of tools, we're an SAP shop, we run SAP HR as our platform. It's not the easiest solution to use if I'm an employee. So the typical scenarios are, and our model is we have employees doing everything themselves, managers doing everything themselves. So obviously very, very distributed model. And typically you've got people that are once in a blue moon needing to run a very particular transaction. I don't know, if someone's on leave of absence or what have you. And typically they struggle to get the work done. So the first opportunity for us, and it's not because it's software as a service, but I guess the model by definition requires the tools to be self-teaching and so obvious and easy to use that it doesn't require that whole back office support and all the rest of it. Creates this massive, I think, opportunity to strip out all that frustration and work that has landed on all the employees' plates as we put in these sort of big corporate capabilities. So that's certainly number one. Number two, for us in PNG, one of our big challenges being a big company is, and if we compare ourselves with many of our competitors, we're significantly larger, is agility. So for us, we need to be able to move a lot quicker than we do. And being able to bring a capability that works brilliantly in country A to many countries very quickly is something that we constantly aspire to. So exactly to your point, Mike, around the fact that software as a service forces process standardization is a massive enabler. So we're very excited about what that can bring because, it's very difficult often to make the business case and get the drive and the buy-in within individual operating units for the greater good of the company that will benefit them in the long run. But with what we're seeing from the likes of Workday, it's such an exciting, appealing proposition. People just say, I want it. Even if they don't realize they're going to get a lot of that other stuff, as you indicated, Hugh, in the background. So I think it will be a massive force for change. Equally as well, if I look at what are the challenges to move down that path, given that, if I just think of PNG, we're heavily invested in SAP, we've got a bit of infrastructure there and so on. Thinking of what is a transition path from where we are to where we might want to be, how can we exploit what's out there, is quite a challenging one. And I can't say we've got any great answers to that at the moment, merely the observation that we see a big opportunity and we want to kind of get our teeth into it.
Good. So with that, let me try and wrap it up. I think we concluded up front that comprehensive HRO as we knew it is officially dead. Transformational HRO is still possible. It requires a lot of focus, a lot of work. It's not as easy as it's sometimes pitched to us as clients. SaaS is going to have a phenomenal impact on HR outsourcing and HR services. It's not yet clear how that impact will manifest itself. It's not yet clear how that's going to be adopted. But what is clear is that SaaS will melt and it will change your business processes going forward. So thank you very much, panel. Thank you very much, audience, for your questions. It was great chatting to you all. Thank you.
Thank you.